My name is Brittany Lager, and I'm an account strategist here at StoryTeller, and I'm just going to get us kicked off here. So if you are on Twitter, we love to share and live tweet with our webinars, so be sure to follow along with the hashtag and follow us at StoryTellerMN. And just a little bit about today's presenter. This is Ed Heil. He is a former TV news reporter and anchor. He founded StoryTeller in 2005 and really wanted to create an inbound marketing agency that was specializing in video production, but that was really based in some of the foundational principles of journalism. So here's Ed.
Thanks, Brett. This is really pretty exciting. Yeah, I'm used to speaking in front of groups, and right now it's just you and me in this conference room, Brittany. So thank you for joining us. This is a quick 30 minutes, as Brittany mentioned, and so we have a lot of content to get to, a lot of information, and we'll keep it at a fairly high level. And so afterwards, if you have questions, please feel free to email me or tweet at me, as Brittany had mentioned. So today we're going to talk about storytelling for businesses. And just to give you a little bit of context, I spent 12 years working in television news, and then as the owner of StoryTeller since 2005, so just about 11 years doing this. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is hearkening back to the old news days and what we did in news, or what I did in news as a reporter, because so much of great storytelling is found in news. And what was interesting about being a reporter for as long as I was is that, and to a great extent you take for granted, is that you really learn how to tell stories and you hone that craft over the course of time. There are certain things that you pick up that that relate to what we do today, that are things like, how do you know what's interesting information for viewers? Well, on TV news, in many ways you're sort of told what's interesting because you understand who your audience is in a metro area or a certain demographic within a metro area. And so there's certain types of stories that are more interesting with certain demographics than others, different ways to position them. You learn how to be really brief. As I think most of us know who watch television news, stories are never very long. As we always say, the book is better than the movie. And in many cases, video is brief, and online today is also very brief. So you learn how to tell a compelling story in a fairly short amount of time. And part of that is you have to understand what makes a great story, because in many cases, people don't know. They've been used to marketing in a certain way, and most people have been trained as marketers, but not so much as brand storytellers. And the beauty of it in news especially is that you had to do it every day. So if your story today wasn't very good, tomorrow you got another one to do. And if you think about, if you have a blog, if you're a business with a blog, imagine blogging every single day, trying to come up with new stories that are going to be relevant to your target audience. So those are some of the things that we learned, and really some of the things we want to focus on today. So a real quick rundown of the agenda. Number one, we're going to talk about understanding your audience. Then we'll get into a little bit of what makes a great story. A lot of times what we found through the years is our clients don't know where to find those stories, and how do they get them to come to them, or how do they go get them. We'll do a little bit of do's and don'ts, and we called it shoot this, not that. And we'll run through a couple of common missed opportunities, if you will, that some of our clients haven't seen or have been able to take advantage of. Then we'll talk about sharing your story. How do you get your story out there in front of the people who will appreciate it most? And in this digital age, the ability to monitor and measure is just awesome. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So what we've heard through the years, and we hear all the time, and everyone says it as though they're the only business or organization in the world with this, is they say, boy, we really have a hard time telling our story. And it'll come out in ways like, boy, our story is really complicated. We have so many different facets to it. It's hard to just pick one. And we have a wide range of stories, or it's always evolving. And sometimes you'll get people say, well, geez, our story depends on who you ask. So really narrowing in and honing in on the best stories can be a challenge for many businesses. And what we also see is that when it comes to identifying the stories and sharing stories, people, especially people of a certain age, will go to an idea of an advertisement. They'll go to this vision of a commercial of some sort, and it becomes very much about marketing your messages to people rather than actually creating a story. And what we know in this day and age of proliferation of content online is that people are drawn to stories and not ads. The challenge is understanding the difference between the two. And it gets really complicating, especially for people who have grown up thinking along the lines of traditional marketing and advertising. So I'll bring you back to the news example and that whole analogy for this, because in news, we used to talk about the newsroom and sales as being like the separation of church and state. And the reason is, if you're not familiar with this, is that the news department should never be influenced by sales. For example, if there's a breaking news story and one of the big clients for the television station had something happen, or maybe the owner embezzled money or whatever that is, the news department should never be influenced to shape their story in a way to protect that sales client. So it was always best if news and sales stayed separate. And if you think about your business or your organization in a similar way, where the idea of just trying to drive revenue, sometimes that can cloud your ability to create really truthful and honest content. Sometimes the best content or best blog or best video might be something that the owner or the boss might go, ooh, geez, do we want to get that out there? But it's really what your prospects and your customers are screaming for. They really want that information. So to the extent that you're able to separate church and state, or TV and sales, or news and sales in this case, the better off you'll be when it comes to trying to find compelling and interesting stories. So one of the things that we'd like to think of in our work, and what we'd recommend when you're mining for stories, is try to find what the best stories are. So before we get into that, who's your audience, and understanding your audience. So the things you want to try to figure out: who are you trying to reach and what's important to them? A big thing that you have to be able to answer when it comes to your audience is, how can you help them? A lot of times we get tripped up in business by saying, geez, this is what's really important to me, rather than saying, what do I do that's really helping our customers or our prospects? So when you're trying to understand your audience, try to ask yourself how you can help. What information do they really value? Kind of going back to what I was saying a second ago, where you might look at some of your information and say, geez, we don't want to let them know that information. But sometimes that information is what that prospect really values. So you have to be careful in many cases, especially if it can be controversial, which you'd probably want to avoid anyway. But an important thing to consider when understanding your audience. And then know within your organization what characters actually speak to your prospects or your audience. In other words, who does your audience relate to in your business? What's that point of view that the audience can really gravitate towards and relate to? So a little case study to put in front of you here. Catholic Charities of St. Paul, Minneapolis is one of our clients we've had for years. A couple of years ago, they came to us and they said, we would love for you guys to produce a capital campaign video for us. And it was actually, the project was intended to tee up a greater campaign to build a new Dorothy Day Center, which is a center for people in transition. A lot of people without homes will stay there for a short period of time. They said, what we'd really like this video to be, though, is we'd like it to be a video that's compelling. We want a really compelling story, and we want it to be shareable, and we really want this thing to drive views. So the idea was to, in some ways make it go viral. Although that's not what they said. They wanted that kind of an impact with the video. And so we started with a very common platform, and they said what we think could be really good is to have our CEO, Tim Marks, great in front of a camera, really strong speaker, knows the messaging really well. And they also wanted to have the board members or a couple board members speak in the video as well, to just talk about the need. if you've ever done anything like this in the past, you know, well, that's pretty common. And we've been producing capital campaign and fundraising videos for more than 10 years. And I would say that that model was really popular 10 years ago. But with the amount of information that's online today, people are beyond that. It's just they get glazed over when they hear the messages from the people who are supposed to say the things that they're actually saying. It's not interesting, and it's certainly not going to be shareable, and it's certainly not going to be the type of video that's going to drive a lot of views. Even if the message is somewhat compelling, the story may not be. So what we said, hey, go with us on this. We have an idea. What we want to recommend is to narrow down the focus of the story, and let's tell a story about one person. And what we want to do is tell the story about someone who uses the Dorothy Day Center, who's in transition, and through their eyes, we can actually show the condition of the current Dorothy Day Center and the need for a new one. And it took them a couple of days. They went back and they thought about it because it was really very different than what they'd done in the past. And they came back and they said, yeah, let's go for it. And they came up with the best client possible. And it's this guy here. His name's Carl. And Carl was in transition. He had lost his job and found himself in the Dorothy Day Center. And he was agreeable to have us follow him for a night. And we watched him from outside the Dorothy Day Center to checking in to staying the night. And his story was compelling. And through his eyes, we were able to show the condition of the Dorothy Day Center and really accomplish all of the messaging that Catholic Charities was trying to convey through his story. And the results were fantastic, both for Catholic Charities primarily, and for us as we were trying to measure the success of this as well. To this date, and it's still growing, they have nearly 8,000 views. They were able to jumpstart the campaign, which has now become a much bigger and much more broad campaign. They've used this video in multiple platforms, so both from online and through email. The digital impact has been significant. And the video also won an Emmy Award. The first Emmy that Catholic Charities has ever won. And it's something that we are super, super proud to partner with them on. And we felt like that was made possible through the story of Carl and not through a lot of messaging that people have become really familiar to hear through capital campaign videos. And so from that, one of the great takeaways is what we always like to think of here when we produce, whether it's video or whether it's downloadable content. It's not what people do or say, it's how you make them feel. So what makes a great story? How do you get people to feel great things? And this is not gonna, the story of Carl is unique. And for a lot of businesses, if your business, for example, you might be sitting there going, well, we're not a nonprofit and we don't have those kind of stories, but you do have other stories that you can tell. So what makes a great story? Stories that teach you something, stories that show you something or show you things you haven't seen before, stories that take you somewhere. One of the great things about video is through video you have the ability to take people to places and show them things they haven't seen before. But even at bare minimum, stories that inspire action. And ultimately, I think that what we're always looking for is stories that make you care. When you can get people to care about your story, and frankly, whether that's a story about Carl or whether that's a story about how you're going to show someone how to do something, we want people to care about that information. In many ways, the worst thing that people can do after looking at a video or reading a blog is feel nothing or feel like it was a total waste of time because they didn't really learn anything. So how do you do that? That's it's one of the challenges. And so what makes a great story are people. This is going to be kind of a common theme. And going back to the news days, what you learn in news early on is that if you've got something like a fire, for example, and you got to go cover a fire, the idea when you do that is to cover the people who are victims in that fire. So yes, it can be annoying. Yes, the media can be really intrusive. And in many ways, what they're trying to get is a perspective of a relatable character for their story. You're looking for someone who's going to say that thing or do that thing that is really truthful and really honest and super, as we like to say, authentic. The guy on the right in this picture is an official. Officials serve their purpose and can be really useful for stories, but a lot of times what officials do in stories, they say what you think and what you expect them to say. If you take this idea and take this concept and apply it to a corporate video, a lot of times the guy on the right becomes your CEO, becomes maybe it's you, maybe it's the director of marketing. It becomes that person who is going to say the things that you know they're just supposed to say. And frankly, that story is not that interesting. What's really interesting are the people that are impacted by the work that you do. So our little pro tip here is that to keep in mind that the best stories are not about the products and services you sell, but about the people who benefit from the products and services. So it's the products and services you sell are not nearly as interesting as the people who are benefiting from the products and services. And if you just take a step back and think about your life and think about how you consume your information, when you're looking to vet a vacation property, or when you're considering buying a really expensive bicycle or something like that, you're looking for information or testimonials, or if you're someone who reads reviews, you're looking for real information. And the cool thing about that is when you read reviews, and sometimes you'll read a review, even if someone slams a product or a service, you'll look at it and go, yeah, that doesn't really apply to me. But the bottom line is you're looking for truth. So to the degree that you can include that in your story, include the truth and include real information from real people. And we have this little sniff test. If you're really not sure, if someone comes to you with an idea, as a reporter, we always used to get people who come up and say, hey, Ed, I got a great story idea. And you go, my audience isn't going to care about that, so that's not a good story. But in your case, if someone comes to you and says, well, geez, we have a great idea for a story for the blog, or we've got a great idea for a video, use a sniff test. If it smells like crap, if it looks like crap, then there's a really, really good chance that it probably is crap. So keep your BS meter handy and make sure that you're doing your audience a favor and protect them from things that really don't pass the sniff test. Hopefully that makes sense. So where do you find these stories, right? Great question. Well, I always like to think that your best stories are really from the people who are closest to the customers. So who are those? Your sales team, if you have an outside sales force. An inside sales team is also terrific. Customer service, they might be the best. People who are fielding calls from your customers. Sometimes they'll share things that you go, wow, that's a terrific story, or that's a great topic that we should cover in our blog. So people like that. Go to your FAQs. I'm always amazed when we start working with a client and we start coming up with blog topics. I think the easiest low-hanging fruit to attain are the FAQs. What are people always asking you? Talk to people in the real world. Tell them what you do. Notice when you're at a cocktail party, what are the questions that they're asking you? Make note of those things, because those might be great stories. It could be great blog topics. Tell them from the perspective of relatable characters. Again, like I said, people who meet your customers within your business might be the best source for the stories. All right, so here's our little do's and don'ts with shoot this, not that. So a couple to think about here. The first one is this. If you're into customer testimonials, produce them. Do a lot of them. Tell the story of that customer, and do that instead of coming up with that video. I saw a video recently of it was like the corporate video, and it had the faces of the people in the company, and they're all making a promise. We promise to do this. We promise to do that. You know what? Instead of making those promises, let's hear from a customer who's actually lived through and been the beneficiary of some of those promises. Tell solution stories. Tell stories about things that you do that are solving problems for people, instead of our new product does this, this, and this. We have the fastest motor. We have the highest quality. There's certain things that people expect to hear from you. They're going to hear the quality story. They're going to hear the story. They're going to hear the performance and the service story. But show them how it's actually worked in the field. Show them a story of solution. So an employee feature story, we have bios on our website. A lot of people have bios on their website. I think most businesses today will have a leadership team bio, or, key people. What if you did this? What if you said, let's, instead of showing Beth, or instead of showing Mark and where they went to school and what they did and what their degrees were in, what if we showed a really cool snippet or told a cool story about that person, something that's actually really, really memorable? Oh, Beth teaches gymnastics at a local gym or a gymnastics club, and you tell that story, so it's maybe a little bit more relatable. You can put some of the additional information, you know, went to school here, this is what I do here, but make the focal point something that's a little bit more interesting. And always is, I guess I'm probably hammering this one flat bread, which is tell the stories about people. Don't tell stories about the building. Don't tell stories about your earnings, your revenue. People don't engage with that. Yes, there's a time and a place. Yes, you can do that. But generally speaking, when we're talking about storytelling for businesses, tell the stories about people. Because we have this line that we like to use around here at StoryTeller, and it's primarily around sales. But when people say they're not interested, what they're really saying is you are not interesting. So the challenge is, can you be interesting? Are you interesting? And what are you doing to become interesting? So what I love about this day and age, and coming from a guy who, you know, I was in the news business from the mid 90s until 2005 when I started StoryTeller. And the old way of telling stories was pretty basic. You could go to the movies, you'd share them on television, on the radio, and in print, but the internet's changed everything. So when you have your stories created, whether it's a video, whether that's a blog, whatever format that is, make sure you disseminate, get that information out. The easiest way, and I think what most of us are most familiar with, is the website, or if you have a blog, make sure that those stories go on your blog. When you have them on your blog or on your website, get them out in social media channels. Great social media channels you want to distribute to. Facebook. Here's one that people think about Facebook and Twitter a lot of times with social media. LinkedIn. For some of you on the webinar today, you're B2B. So Facebook can be good, you know, but really your LinkedIn network might be your best place to get that story out. If you have a really good Twitter following, post your stories on Twitter multiple times. If you're into video, YouTube is a no-brainer. Optimize those videos for search, because YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world. We also like hosted platforms that are custom. We use here a company called Wistia. What we love about Wistia, we put our videos on YouTube and Wistia, but what we love about it, you can gate the content, so you can get email addresses ahead of time, and you can also put a call to action on the end, so you can drive your viewers back to your website or to a landing page and things of that matter. Which is the other place? Put it on landing page. Use your content, use your stories to drive new leads and hopefully some conversion. Monitoring and measuring, again, this goes hand in hand with the digital age, and we have the ability to measure and monitor content like never before. It's amazing how much more accountable marketers need to be in this day and age, because they can be, and frankly, in our opinion, they should be. We can look at blog views, we can look at video views, we can track conversion rates now, right? We can look at new email addresses if we have contact forms and information for download. So we can say, geez, we have a client that went from 1,500 email addresses to 16,000 over the course of the last few years. That's good measurable growth that we monitor and we continue to try to develop the engagement. So once you get the email addresses, to stay in front of the people with engaging information in stories. And again, I urge you to make your email lead nurturing efforts about useful information that people will value, that your audience cares about, and to peel away from the traditional ways of sending out and spamming your marketing information, if at all possible. And we can measure open rates. We can measure the conversion through there. And ultimately, your top line or your bottom line. But top line revenue growth is a great way to measure whether or not some of your stories are translating and transferring into new business for you. So some key takeaways for today. And what I hope we, in this short amount of time as we get close to wrapping this up and taking some questions, I think, before we wrap it up. Know your audience. Try to do your best to discover what the real stories are in your business. What are the stories about the people? What are the stories that people care about? And when I say people, that your customers, your prospects, be interesting. And if you're not interesting, find a way to become interesting and relate to people in a different way. Share your stories through social media, and then measure your success and adjust. I think that one of the great things also about this day and age, it's not like it was 10 years ago, for sure 15, 20 years ago, where you had that print brochure and got to make sure it's right before we go to press. Hey, if something's not working, change it. Try something different, because you can do that. So thanks. We're happy to answer any questions that you have. And Britt, what do we got?
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. We do have a few questions that have come in. If you have any other questions, feel free to enter them in now, and we'll just take a few questions until 2 o'clock here. So the first question from Mackenzie is, how do you appeal to customers who are price shopping, for example, for insurance or something like that? How would you tell the stories for that?
So, let's just say it's insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're selling? Are you selling price? It's funny, I just had a conversation with my insurance agent yesterday about this, and dealing with the Geicos and the Progressives. I think you're selling something different. And what I would probably lean more towards are telling the stories of the things that you promote the most about yourself, which is, I don't know you, Mackenzie, but I'm thinking that it's, you're accessible, your customer service. When things really hit the fan, who's going to be the person who shows up at your house? What stories do you have to share about that? I don't think that you really, and maybe you do, but I don't know that the person who's price shopping is really the best prospect for you and what you do. I could be wrong, but I would say I would still go back to the value that you offer is an intangible in that way, and share those stories about how you've done that for your other clients.
Yeah, so Pat has another question. He says, you said short stories are better, but do you have a length that you generally aim for?
That's a terrific question. So I'll speak primarily to video, because I think that's where the greatest misconception is, and we actually have a webinar we did on video length. I always say the length of your story should be as long as it takes and is able to keep people captivated and interesting. Businesses, organizations have this tendency to blather on about stuff. And in fact, I think the hardest thing about great storytelling is knowing how to edit your content to get it to the right length, and whether that is a blog or a video. There's this big movement, a lot of people say, oh, your video shouldn't be more than a minute. It shouldn't be more than 45 seconds or a minute and a half or whatever that is. I spent my life telling stories in a minute and a half. Some stories can be 5 minutes. If your story is really, really good, let it go. But just be very critical of how much is too much. And like I always like to tell people, we still go to movies. We still sit in the theater for 2 hours. We'll actually even watch a movie on our phone for 2 hours.
Thanks, Ed. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up for the afternoon. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to Ed. His email is ed@storytellermn.com. Thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to be with us. Have a great afternoon.